Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
Beneath the golden chandeliers of the Grayson estate, Carly's icy demeanor masked a lifetime of betrayal. Her perfectly crafted facade unraveled the night Greg, frail and bedridden, whispered, "It wasn't illness that broke me, it was Carly's poison." Gion's world shattered as she uncovered the truth. Carly's affair with the family lawyer wasn't just adultery. It was the cornerstone of a web of lies designed to strip Greg of his fortune and erase a daughter she once claimed never existed. What else had this woman dressed in luxury and lies buried in the shadows of the Grayson dynasty? The hospital room was eerily quiet, save for the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. Adam Grayson lay on the sterile bed, his body bruised and battered, a stark contrast to the image of privilege his name evoked. The son of Greg Grayson, a self-made magnate in pharmaceuticals, and Carly Grayson, the perfect socialite. Adam had always been perceived as having it all, but beneath the surface of opulence, his life was a tumultuous storm. Adam's fist clenched around the coarse fabric of the hospital blanket as he gazed out the window, his jaw tight with the weight of unspoken emotions. His mind replayed the events of the previous night, a brutal street fight outside a dimly lit bar. His anger, the pent-up rage, had exploded into violence, leaving him hospitalized and questioning his existence. He sneered at the irony. People thought he was the golden boy of the Grayson Empire, but they didn't see the cracks in his foundation. His mother, Carly, had always been cold and distant, her love conditional and calculated. The lack of genuine affection from her gnawed at him more than he would ever admit. And his father? Greg had buried himself in his work, perhaps as an escape from the lifeless marriage, leaving Adam to grapple with the void alone. When the door creaked open, Adam turned his head lazily. He expected a nurse with a clipboard, but instead a petite woman with dark eyes and a calm demeanor stepped in. She carried a folder under her arm and wore scrubs that seemed to fit her as naturally as her quiet authority. "I'm Gian Perez," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I'll be your nurse while you recover." Adam raised an eyebrow, his usual smirk curling at the edges of his lips. "Great. Another babysitter." Unperturbed, Gian moved to his bedside, checking the monitors and jotting down notes. "I prefer the term caregiver," she replied. "But if you want to make my job harder with your charming attitude, be my guest." Adam let out a dry laugh. "Touché." From the moment she entered the room, Gian sensed something about Adam. Beneath his sarcasm and guarded exterior was a wounded soul. His vulnerability was palpable, even though he tried to mask it with bravado. It was a feeling Gian had encountered before in patients who didn't know how to ask for help. "You've been through quite the ordeal," Gian commented, her tone neutral. "Care to share what led to it?" Adam leaned back, his gaze narrowing. "What is this? Therapy?" "It's part of my job to understand my patients," she said simply. "But if you'd rather keep it to yourself, I'll just focus on your vitals." For a moment, Adam said nothing. Then, surprising even himself, he muttered, "Just a fight. Got out of hand." Gian didn't press further. Instead, she adjusted the IV drip, her movements efficient yet soothing. "Well, for what it's worth, you're lucky. A few more hits and you'd be looking at surgery." "Lucky," Adam repeated, his voice dripping with bitterness. "That's one way to put it." Over the next few days, Adam and Gian's interactions followed a predictable rhythm. He would make a sardonic comment, and she would counter it with calm professionalism. Yet beneath the surface, a mutual respect began to grow. Gian didn't treat Adam like the spoiled heir others assumed he was, and Adam found himself lowering his defenses, bit by bit. One evening, as Gian adjusted his bandages, Adam broke the silence. "You always this unshakable? Or is it just me bringing out your best?" Gian chuckled. "Let's just say I've dealt with my share of difficult patients. You're not even in the top 5. Adam smirked. "Guess I'll have to try harder." "You do that," Gian said, her tone light. "Or you could focus on healing. That's an option too." By the end of the week, their dynamic had shifted. Adam shared more about his strained relationship with Carly and his father's absence, while Gian listened without judgment. She saw glimpses of the person he could be, someone yearning for connection and purpose. One night, as the city lights cast a soft glow through the window, Adam asked, "Why do you do this, Gian? Deal with people like me?" Her answer was simple. "Because everyone deserves a chance to heal." The sincerity in her voice caught Adam off guard. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen not as the heir to the Grayson fortune, but as a person. As Adam's health improved, Gian noticed the subtle shift in his demeanor. He smiled more, his sarcasm tempered with genuine humor. But just as hope seemed to blossom, Gian discovered something that shook her resolve. While organizing Adam's discharge papers, she stumbled upon his family records. The Grayson name stood out like a beacon. She had no idea he was connected to such wealth, and the realization hit her like a cold wave. Her life and his were worlds apart. That evening, Gian made a decision. To protect herself and him from the inevitable complications, she fabricated a story about an affair with a colleague. "I think it's best if we part ways," she said, avoiding his gaze. Adam's face hardened, the familiar walls snapping back into place. "Guess I was wrong about you." The pain in his voice lingered as he left the hospital the next day, boarding a plane to escape the city that had become suffocating. Gian watched him go, her heart heavy with unspoken truths. The late afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of the Grayson estate, casting long golden shadows across the polished hardwood floors. Gian Perez stood at the threshold, a suitcase in one hand and a neatly folded letter of employment in the other. She adjusted her grip, acutely aware of the grandeur that surrounded her marble archways, crystal chandeliers, and a silence so pristine it felt oppressive. This was nothing like the modest hospital where she had last seen Adam Grayson, the man whose absence still lingered in her thoughts like a phantom ache. But this wasn't about Adam, she reminded herself. Months of financial strain had left her little choice but to accept this live-in nursing position. Greg Grayson, the estate's patriarch, was suffering from a mysterious illness, and the offer came with room and board, solving several of her problems at once. Gian straightened her back and rang the doorbell, the sound reverberating through the cavernous interior. The door swung open, revealing a uniformed butler with a face as stoic as the statues in the garden. "Ms. Perez?" he asked, his tone clipped yet polite. "Yes," Gian replied, stepping forward. "I'm here for Mr. Grayson." The butler nodded, ushering her inside. "This way, please." As Gian followed him down a labyrinth of hallways, she couldn't ignore the weight of the silence, broken only by the faint ticking of a grandfather clock. They reached Greg Grayson's room, where the air was thick with antiseptic and faintly floral cologne. Greg lay propped against a mountain of pillows, his pallor stark against the dark wood of the bed frame. His once powerful frame had withered, but his eyes sharp and probing, fixed on Gian with quiet intensity. "You must be the new nurse," Greg said, his voice thin but steady. "Yes, Mr. Grayson," Gian replied, approaching his bedside. "I'll be taking care of you." His lips twitched in what might have been an attempt at a smile. Then I hope you're better company than the last one. Gian had barely begun her duties when Carly Grayson made her entrance, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood. Carly's beauty was undeniable, but her expression was a mask of practiced warmth, her eyes cold and calculating. "Welcome, Ms. Perez," Carly said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I trust you've settled in?" "Yes, thank you," Gian replied, keeping her tone professional. Carly's smile tightened. "Good. I expect my husband to receive the best care. He has delicate needs." There was something disingenuous about Carly's concern, a hollowness that made Gian wary. Over the next few days, Gian observed how Carly hovered around Greg, offering perfunctory gestures of care while subtly dismissing his discomforts. Carly's interactions with Gian, however, were superficially pleasant, tinged with an undertone Gian couldn't quite place something between suspicion and manipulation. As weeks passed, Gian began to notice the cracks in the Grayson household's facade. Carly's veneer of devotion was paper-thin, and the marriage appeared to be one of convenience rather than affection. She rarely sat by Greg's side for more than a few minutes, preferring instead to host lavish luncheons or attend charity galas. One evening, as Gian administered Greg's medication, he caught her hand with a surprisingly firm grip. "Carly means well," he said, his voice low, "but don't trust everything you see." Gian hesitated, her pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" Before Greg could answer, Carly entered the room, her presence like a sudden gust of cold air. "Everything all right?" she asked, her gaze flicking between them. "Fine," Gian replied quickly, but the unease lingered. It wasn't long before Gian stumbled upon a startling connection. While organizing medical supplies in the study one day, she noticed a photo album tucked away on a high shelf. Flipping through its pages, she found an old family portrait. Her breath caught as she stared at a younger Greg, his features strikingly similar to her own. "Find something interesting?" Carly's voice cut through the quiet, making Gian jump. "I was just putting things away," Gian replied, closing the album hurriedly. Carly's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Be careful not to overstep." Late one night, as Gian prepared Greg's medications, she overheard a heated conversation between Carly and another voice, low and gravelly, but distinctly familiar. Curious, Gian pressed herself against the wall near the slightly ajar door. "She's too curious," Carly said sharply. "If she starts asking questions, she won't. You hired her for a reason," the man replied. "Stick to the plan." Gian's mind raced. Who were they talking about, and why did Carly's tone drip with malice? The puzzle pieces were beginning to form a picture, but it was incomplete. It wasn't until the next morning, when she saw a family crest embroidered on Greg's robe, that the final piece fell into place. Gian had seen that crest before on Adam's belongings during his hospital stay. Her hands trembled as she connected the dots. Adam was Greg's son, and by some cruel twist of fate, she had unwittingly become entangled in the life of the man she had tried to leave behind. That evening, Gian sat in her room, staring at her reflection in the ornate mirror. Her feelings for Adam, once carefully buried, surfaced with a vengeance. But now, they were laced with confusion and a gnawing sense of betrayal. How could she reconcile her past with her present? And what would happen if Adam returned to this house, unaware of her presence? As the days turned into weeks, Gian threw herself into her work, her interactions with Carly becoming a battle of subtle defiance. She documented everything: Greg's symptoms, the inconsistencies in Carly's stories, and her suspicions about the household's secrets. But the looming question remained: what would Adam think of her now? The rain tapped lightly against the tall windows of the Grayson estate. A soft but persistent rhythm that mirrored the unease settling in Jian's chest. Days had turned into weeks since she accepted her role as Greg Grayson's live-in nurse, and yet every corner of the estate seemed to hold more secrets than she could unravel. As she carried a tray of carefully measured medications to Greg's room, she couldn't help but notice the faint sound of voices echoing from the hallway. Jian paused at the door, her hand hesitating on the polished brass handle. Carly's sharp tones, unmistakable, cut through the quiet. "It's all under control. Stop worrying." The response, though muffled, was measured and low, Greg's voice. "You've said that before, Carly. And look where we are now." The exchange ended as abruptly as it began, leaving Jian to wonder what exactly Greg had meant. She inhaled deeply, pushing the door open with practiced calm. Inside, Greg's condition appeared unchanged, though his eyes carried a heaviness that hadn't been there before. Jian placed the tray on the bedside table, glancing at the man she had come to respect despite his frail state. His features' deep-set eyes, a strong jawline, struck a chord of familiarity within her. It was as if she had seen those lines before, not just on family photos scattered across the estate, but somewhere far more personal. "Another dose?" Greg's voice broke her train of thought, hoarse but tinged with humor. "I'll start glowing in the dark at this rate." Jian allowed herself a small smile as she adjusted his pillows. "It's not quite that potent, but I'll keep an eye out for side effects." Greg chuckled weakly, but the sound quickly dissolved into a fit of coughing. Jian leaned closer, her hands steadying him until the spasm passed. "Mr. Grayson, are you feeling—" "I'm fine," he interrupted, waving her off. "Just tired." As she worked, Jian's gaze lingered on Greg. It wasn't just his features that felt oddly familiar. It was his mannerisms. The way he tilted his head in thought, the cadence of his speech, it all triggered memories she couldn't place. The next evening, as Jian prepared to leave Greg's room, he called out softly, "Wait!" She turned, noticing the way his eyes narrowed slightly, as if weighing his words. "You're different," he said at last. "Not like the others?" "Others?" Jian echoed, unsure of his meaning. "The ones Carly hires. They come and go, but you—" He trailed off, his gaze drifting toward the window. "You remind me of someone." The statement sent a chill through her, though Greg's words remained maddeningly vague. Before she could press him further, his hand trembled as he gestured toward a photo on the bedside table, a younger Greg, standing beside a woman with striking dark hair. "My wife wasn't always like this," he murmured, almost to himself. "Things were different once." "Different how?" Jian asked gently, hoping to encourage him to elaborate. Greg's lips parted as if to answer, but a sudden dizziness overcame him. His head sagged against the pillows, and his eyes fluttered shut. Panic prickled at Jian's skin as she called for assistance, the moment of revelation slipping through her fingers. Over the following days, Greg's cryptic remark haunted Jian. She couldn't shake the feeling that he had been on the verge of telling her something significant, but with his health deteriorating, direct answers were elusive. Determined to find clarity, she spent her spare time exploring the study, where she had once seen the old family photo album. It was there, tucked behind a stack of financial ledgers, that she uncovered something unexpected, a small box of photographs. Among them was a portrait of a woman with features startlingly similar to her own. Her heart raced as she studied the picture, trying to reconcile the woman's familiar face with the stranger she had never met. Before she could delve deeper, the sound of footsteps outside the door jolted her. Hastily returning the box to its hiding place, Jian exited the study, her thoughts swirling with unanswered questions. Suspicion drew Jian's attention back to Carly, whose behavior had grown increasingly erratic. The woman's cool facade occasionally cracked, revealing flashes of irritation and impatience. Jian began to notice patterns. Carly's insistence on overseeing Greg's medications, her tight-lipped silences whenever family history came up, and the way she seemed to regard Jian with thinly veiled disdain. One afternoon, Jian decided to test the waters. "Mrs. Grayson," she began cautiously, "Mr. Grayson mentioned someone recently, a woman who seems important to the family. Do you know who he might have meant?" Carly's smile was brittle, her response clipped. "Greg says a lot of things. I wouldn't read too much into it." The dismissive answer only fueled Jian's resolve. She couldn't shake the feeling that Carly was hiding something connected to both Greg's past and the woman in the photograph. As Jian pieced together fragments of Greg's comments and the visual clues she'd uncovered, the truth began to take shape. Late one evening, as she sat in her room poring over her notes, the realization struck her like a bolt of lightning. Adam. The similarities she had noticed between Greg and herself, the same ones she saw in the photograph, were undeniable. Adam was not just a stranger from her past. He was Greg's son. The weight of the revelation left her breathless. How could she have missed it? And more importantly, what did it mean for her role in the Grayson household? As she grappled with the implications, a knock at the door startled her. Opening it cautiously, she found Carly standing there, her expression unreadable. "Jian," she said smoothly, "we need to talk." Jian's heart pounded as Carly stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. "I've noticed you've been curious," Carly began, her tone icy. "That's admirable, but perhaps you should focus on your job instead of the past." The veiled threat sent a shiver down Jian's spine, but she refused to back down. "I'm just trying to understand how best to help Mr. Grayson," she replied evenly. Carly's smile tightened. "Then I suggest you leave the investigating to those who know what they're doing." The encounter solidified Jian's determination. If Carly was this intent on keeping her in the dark, it could only mean the secrets she guarded were more dangerous than Jian had imagined. The next day, Jian returned to the study with renewed purpose. She searched the drawers meticulously, her hands trembling as she uncovered an old letter tucked beneath a stack of forgotten papers. It was addressed to Greg and bore a postmark from over 2 decades ago. The contents of the letter were brief but devastating. It referenced the birth of a daughter and hinted at complications that had arisen shortly afterward. Jian's vision blurred as she reread the words. Could it be possible? Could she herself be connected to the Graysons in a way she had never fathomed? Her thoughts turned to Adam, the man she had pushed away, unaware of the deeper threads that bound them. The revelations threatened to overwhelm her, but Jian knew there was no turning back. The truth, whatever it might be, had to come to light. The morning sunlight slanted through the heavy curtains in Greg Grayson's room, but the warmth it offered did little to soften the chill that seemed to have taken root there. Jane Perez adjusted her gloves, her eyes scanning the array of medications on the nightstand. Each vial, each bottle was meticulously labeled, yet the sheer quantity of treatments made her stomach churn. Something didn't sit right. "Good morning, Mr. Grayson," Jian said softly, lifting her voice just enough to carry over the hum of the air purifier. Greg stirred, his face drawn and pale, his eyes barely opening. "Morning," he croaked, his voice a faint shadow of its former strength. Jian pulled a chair close to the bed, her movements calm and deliberate. "How are you feeling today?" "Like a bag of bones with a clock ticking inside," he replied, attempting a weak smile. The humor didn't reach Jian. Her professional instincts told her that something was deeply wrong, something beyond his diagnosed condition. But the presence of Carly Grayson, hovering like a specter in the corner of the room, kept her from voicing her concerns. Jian's unease grew over the days that followed. Greg's symptoms, nausea, sudden episodes of confusion, and unsteady breathing didn't align with the advanced Parkinson's disease listed on his medical records. Though Parkinson's was progressive, these new symptoms seemed out of place and alarmingly rapid. One afternoon, as she prepared his lunch in the estate's gleaming kitchen, she found herself reaching for her phone. A quick search for unexplained symptoms in elderly patients brought up possibilities that were both benign and sinister. Poisoning, one article suggested, could mimic a wide array of illnesses. The thought struck her like a cold blade. Shaking her head, she set her phone aside and focused on the task at hand. She couldn't leap to conclusions, not yet. Later that night, while organizing Greg's medications, Jian noticed a small vial tucked away at the back of the drawer. Its label was faded, the dosage instructions almost illegible. She frowned, holding it up to the light. "Find something interesting?" Carly's voice made her jump. Turning swiftly, Jian held the vial at her side. "Just sorting things out." Carly's smile was tight, her eyes sharp as they flicked to Jian's hand. "Good. Keep it that way." It didn't take long for Jian to realize that Carly exercised near total control over Greg's treatment. She personally approved every prescription, dismissed Jian's questions with sharp retorts, and insisted on handling the most sensitive aspects of Greg's care. "You don't need to concern yourself with the finer details," Carly said one morning when Jian brought up the inconsistencies in Greg's medication schedule. "Just follow the regimen." "But some of these dosages—" "I said, follow the regimen," Carly interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. That evening, Jian began keeping her own records. She documented every pill, every injection, every reaction Greg displayed after treatment. It wasn't just about his safety anymore. It was about finding the truth. The chance to confront Greg came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Jian found him sitting upright in bed, his eyes clearer than they had been in days. Taking it as a sign of lucidity, she broached the topic delicately. "Mr. Grayson," she began, taking a seat beside him, "I need to ask you something about your condition." Greg's gaze shifted to her, his brow furrowing. "Go on." "These medications," she continued, choosing her words carefully, "they're not typical for Parkinson's. Have you noticed any changes?" His expression darkened, his hand trembling as he reached for hers. "Jian, there's more going on here than you know. Carly." A coughing fit interrupted him, violent and prolonged. Jian grabbed a glass of water, steadying him as the episode subsided. But when she tried to continue the conversation, his strength was gone. His eyes drifted shut, and he sank back into the pillows. His breathing labored. Desperation clawed at her. She had been so close to getting answers, but once again, the moment slipped away. Over the next few days, Jian's suspicions solidified into resolve. She began to notice patterns in Carly's behavior, the way she hovered when certain medications were administered, the way her eyes seemed to linger on Greg with something far colder than concern. Jian knew she was running out of time. Greg's condition was deteriorating, and whatever secrets Carly was hiding, they were wrapped tightly in the layers of control she exerted over the household. Jian needed allies, evidence, something to expose the truth before it was too late. As she sat in her room late one night reviewing her notes, her thoughts drifted to Adam. Would he believe her if she reached out? Would he even care? Pushing the thought aside, she returned to her work. She had to act, but she would have to act alone for now. The Grayson estate was eerily silent as Gian paced the length of her small, sparsely furnished room. The neatly stacked files on her desk mocked her, each page a fragment of the truth she desperately sought to uncover. Greg's condition was worsening by the day, and Carly's looming presence felt like a noose tightening around her neck. She needed help, someone with authority, someone who could act where she could not. Her mind circled back to Lawrence Davis, the family's long-serving lawyer. His name had come up frequently in Carly's conversations with the household staff. Trusted, reliable, and discreet, they said. Gian wasn't convinced, but she had few options left. With trembling hands, she dialed his number. Lawrence Davis was every bit as polished as Gian had imagined. He arrived the next afternoon, his tailored suit and sharp features exuding confidence. Gian met him in the estate's grand drawing room, where sunlight poured through the towering windows, casting long shadows on the ornate rug. "Ms. Perez," he greeted her, his voice warm yet measured. "Carly mentioned you wanted to speak with me." Gian forced a smile, gesturing for him to sit. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Davis. It's about Mr. Grayson. There are some irregularities in his treatment that concern me." Lawrence settled into the chair, steepling his fingers. "Irregularities?" "Yes," Gian replied, her voice steady despite the doubt clawing at her. "His symptoms don't align with his diagnosis, and some of the medications Carly insists on administering aren't listed in his treatment plan?" Lawrence's expression didn't falter. "Have you brought these concerns to Carly?" "I have," Gian admitted, "but she dismisses them outright." He nodded slowly as though weighing her words. "Carly has always been protective of Greg's care, but I assure you, everything she does is with his best interests in mind." Gian's frustration bubbled beneath the surface. "Mr. Davis, I'm not sure that's true. I think there's more going on here. Something that could be endangering his life." For a moment, Lawrence's gaze sharpened, but the shift was so fleeting, Gian wondered if she had imagined it. "These are serious accusations, Ms. Perez," he said finally. "If you have evidence to support them, I'd be happy to review it." Unbeknownst to Gian, Lawrence's loyalty lay not with Greg, but with Carly. Their partnership was forged in secrecy and strengthened by shared greed. As he left the meeting, Lawrence's mind raced with possibilities. Carly had warned him about Gian's curiosity, but he hadn't realized how close she was to uncovering their schemes. Later that evening, Lawrence met Carly in the library, where she stood by the fireplace, a glass of wine in hand. "She's starting to ask questions," he said, without preamble. Carly's lips curved into a cold smile. "Let her. She won't find anything." Lawrence frowned. "She's persistent, Carly. If she keeps digging—" "She won't," Carly interrupted, her tone icy. "You'll handle it." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Of course." As he left the library, Lawrence resolved to steer Gian away from the truth, using whatever means necessary. The following week, Lawrence invited Gian to his office under the guise of reviewing her concerns. His office, housed in a sleek building downtown, was a stark contrast to the Grayson estate. The walls were lined with leather-bound books, and the scent of polished wood filled the air. "Thank you for coming," Lawrence said as he ushered her inside. "I've had some time to think about your concerns." Gian sat across from him, clutching a folder containing her notes. "And?" "I understand your position," he began, his tone empathetic. "But I've reviewed the family's medical arrangements, and everything appears to be in order. Carly has consulted with some of the best specialists in the field." Gian frowned. "With all due respect, Mr. Davis, that doesn't explain the discrepancies in Greg's treatment." Lawrence leaned forward, his expression earnest. Ms. Perez, I've been with the Grayson family for over 2 decades. If there were any foul play, I would have seen it. Sometimes, as caregivers, we become so focused on our patients that we start seeing patterns that aren't there. The words landed like a blow. Jian's confidence wavered, doubt creeping in. Could she have misinterpreted the signs? Still, she said hesitantly, shouldn't we investigate further? Lawrence's smile was kind, but dismissive. I'll look into it, but I'm certain there's nothing to worry about. As Jian left Lawrence's office, a heavy weight settled in her chest. She wanted to believe him. His calm demeanor and assurances were convincing, but something didn't feel right. The nagging suspicion that she was being manipulated refused to fade. Back at the estate, Jian retreated to her room, the folder of notes untouched on her desk. For the first time since she had started unraveling the Grayson family's secrets, she felt utterly alone. In the quiet of her room, Jian replayed the conversation with Lawrence in her mind. The subtle shifts in his tone, the way he had deflected her concerns, it all pointed to one conclusion. He was hiding something. Carly's reach was deeper than she had anticipated, and Lawrence was a part of it. Determined not to let their deception deter her, Jian reopened her notes, her resolve hardening. She would find the truth, with or without their help. The streets were unusually quiet as Jian Perez walked home from the local market, her arms laden with groceries. The faint glow of streetlights illuminated her path, casting long shadows that danced with her every step. The Grayson estate loomed in the distance, its spires cutting into the night sky like jagged teeth. Jian's thoughts were heavy, swirling with unanswered questions about Greg's declining health and Carly's increasingly erratic behavior. Her steps faltered as she approached the park near the estate. A soft, raspy voice called out from the shadows, "Miss Spare a coin?" Turning toward the sound, Jian's eyes fell on a figure slumped against a bench. His appearance was haggard clothes, torn and mismatched. A weathered hat pulled low over his face, but it was his eyes, milky with cataracts, yet startlingly sharp, that caught her attention. "Are you okay?" Jian asked, setting her groceries down. The man gave a wry chuckle. "That depends on your definition of okay." Jian crouched beside him, her voice gentle but firm. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" The man shook his head. "Been wandering these streets for years now. Name's Benson. Used to have a roof over my head, a purpose. But that was a lifetime ago." Something about the way he spoke stirred a flicker of recognition in Jian. "Benson, were you connected to the Graysons?" The question felt absurd even as she asked it, but the way Benson's head snapped up confirmed her suspicion. "You know the Graysons?" he asked, his tone suddenly wary. "I'm their nurse," Jian admitted cautiously. "Mr. Grayson is very ill, and I have my concerns." Benson let out a bitter laugh. "Ill, is he? That woman must be getting sloppy." "What woman?" Jian pressed, her heart quickening. Benson waved her off. "It's late, miss. You shouldn't be out here talking to an old fool like me." But Jian was not deterred. "Come with me," she said. "I can give you a warm meal and a place to rest." For a moment, Benson hesitated, his pride warring with his need. Finally, he nodded. Back at the estate, Jian ushered Benson into the modest staff quarters. She prepared a simple meal while he sat at the small dining table, his gaze darting around as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. "This is kind of you," he said, his voice softening as he took a sip of the soup she placed before him. "Not many would bother with the likes of me." "Tell me about the Graysons," Gian said, her tone gentle but insistent. "You seem to know them." Benson's spoon paused mid-air. He set it down carefully, the clatter loud in the otherwise silent room. "I worked for them once," he said finally. "Served as their butler for over 20 years. "What happened?" Gian asked. "Carly happened," Benson replied, his voice hardening. "She was different back then. All charm and ambition. But beneath the surface, ruthless. When I discovered her affair with Lawrence Davis, I thought Greg should know. Thought he'd thank me for it. Instead, Carly had me cast out no pension, no home, nothing. She told Greg I'd stolen from the family." John's stomach churned. Did Greg believe her? "He didn't want to," Benson said. "But Carly, she's a master manipulator." The more Benson spoke, the more Gian realized how valuable he could be. His knowledge of the family's past, combined with his first-hand experience of Carly's duplicity, made him an unexpected but vital ally. "We need to expose her," Gian said, her voice low but resolute. "Greg's health is deteriorating, and I suspect she's behind it." Benson nodded grimly. "If she's as desperate as I think she is, she won't stop until she has it all. But exposing her won't be easy. She's careful, always has been." "Then we'll have to be even more careful," Gian replied. "Tell me everything you know." Benson spent the next hour recounting tales of Carly's machinations, from forging documents to alienating Greg from his allies. Gian took meticulous notes, her determination hardening with every word. By the time Benson retired for the night, she had the beginnings of a plan. Alone in her room, Gian stared at the notes spread across her desk. Benson's revelations confirmed what she had long suspected. Carly was not just indifferent to Greg's suffering, she was actively contributing to it. And with Lawrence's help, she was ensuring her control over the Grayson fortune remained unchallenged. But Gian now had something Carly didn't expect, an ally who knew her every move. Together, she and Benson could dismantle the facade Carly had spent decades building. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Gian finally allowed herself a moment of hope. The road ahead was treacherous, but for the first time, she felt she had the tools to fight back. The gray dawn seeped through the heavy curtains of Gian's modest quarters, painting the walls in muted shades of silver. She sat at her small desk, staring at the notebook filled with hastily scrawled notes from the previous night's conversation with Benson. His revelations had shaken her to the core, but had also solidified her resolve. If Carly Grayson thought she could continue her campaign of deceit unchallenged, she was gravely mistaken. Gian knew that time was not on her side. Greg's health was deteriorating rapidly, and Carly's hold on the household grew tighter with each passing day. But now, with Benson's testimony, she had a thread to unravel the web of lies that had ensnared the Grayson family. Later that morning, Gian brought Benson a steaming cup of coffee, the aroma mingling with the faint scent of furniture polish that lingered in the staff quarters. He sat at the small table, his weathered hands wrapped around the mug, as he stared into the dark liquid. "Thank you," he murmured, glancing up at her. "It's been years since anyone's shown me this kind of kindness." "You don't need to thank me," Gian replied softly. "What you've told me could save Greg's life. That's thanks enough." Benson nodded, his expression darkening. "But you don't know the half of it, Ms. Perez. Carly didn't just ruin my life, she's poisoned everything she's touched." "Tell me everything," Gian urged, pulling a chair closer. "I need to know what we're up against." For the next hour, Benson recounted the grim history of Carly's machinations. He spoke of how she had charmed Greg in their early years, presenting herself as the perfect partner while carefully isolating him from his trusted allies. Her affair with Lawrence Davis had begun shortly after their marriage, and together they had orchestrated a slow, calculated campaign to consolidate their control over the Grayson fortune. She knew Greg would never divorce her, Benson said bitterly. His sense of loyalty, his pride, she used it all against him. And when I found out about her and Davis, I thought I could stop her. I thought Greg would believe me. But he didn't, Gian said, her voice heavy with understanding. Benson shook his head. Carly is a master manipulator. She turned it around on me, accused me of stealing. I was out on the street before I even realized what had happened. As Benson spoke, Gian felt a surge of anger bubbling beneath her calm exterior. Carly's actions were more than manipulative, they were monstrous. Yet the more she learned, the more determined she became to stop her. We need evidence, Gian said firmly. Something concrete that ties Carly and Davis to their crimes. Without it, they'll just deny everything. Benson's gaze was steady. There's plenty to find if you know where to look. Carly may be clever, but she's not infallible. She keeps records, documents, letters. She's arrogant enough to think no one will ever find them. Then that's where we start, Gian said, a spark of hope igniting within her. We'll gather everything we can, every lie, every betrayal, and when the time is right, we'll bring her down. That evening, Gian began her work in earnest. Armed with Benson's knowledge of the estate, she ventured into the forbidden corners of the Grayson mansion. The study was her first target, a room Carly rarely entered, but one Benson remembered as a repository of old family documents. The air was thick with the scent of aged leather and dust as Gian carefully sifted through the drawers of Greg's ornate desk. She found old contracts, letters, and receipts, but nothing that directly implicated Carly. Her frustration mounted as the hours ticked by. Looking for something? Gian froze at the sound of Carly's voice. She turned slowly to see the woman standing in the doorway, her arms crossed and a predatory smile on her lips. I was just organizing Mr. Grayson's files, Gian said, keeping her tone neutral. Carly stepped into the room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. How diligent of you, she said, her gaze sharp as it swept over the desk. But let me give you some advice, Ms. Perez. Focus on your duties, not on matters that don't concern you. Gian met Carly's gaze, her heart pounding but her expression calm. My only concern is Mr. Grayson's well-being. Good, Carly said, her smile tightening. Keep it that way. As Carly left the room, Gian exhaled slowly, her hands trembling. She knew she was treading on dangerous ground. Carly's warning was thinly veiled, a reminder that she was always watching. But the confrontation only strengthened Gian's resolve. The next day, she enlisted Benson's help to search the mansion's attic, a space he remembered Carly using to store items she wanted hidden from prying eyes. Together, they combed through dusty boxes and forgotten trunks, their determination unwavering. It was in an old steamer trunk that Gian finally found a breakthrough, a series of letters between Carly and Davis, their contents damning. The correspondence detailed their plans to isolate Greg, seize control of his business, and most chillingly, their discussions of his treatment. Gian's hands shook as she read the letters, the enormity of Carly's betrayal sinking in. This is it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. This is the proof we need. Benson placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression grim. Be careful, Miss Perez. Carly won't go down without a fight. That night, Gian sat alone in her room, the letters spread out before her. The weight of the discovery pressed down on her, but so did the knowledge that she was now a target. Carly and Davis would do whatever it took to protect their secrets, and Gian knew she had to be ready for the fight ahead. As the moonlight filtered through her window, Gian made a silent vow. She would not let Carly win. With Benson by her side and the truth in her hands, she would expose the Grayson family's darkest secrets and ensure justice was served. The storm outside raged with ferocity, its howling winds rattling the windows of the Grayson estate. Inside her modest room, Gian sat hunched over Greg's medical files, the soft glow of her desk lamp barely piercing the oppressive gloom. Her fingers trembled as she sifted through the endless documents, her focus narrowing on every detail that seemed out of place. She had spent countless nights here seeking the truth in the paper trail Carly had so meticulously tried to bury. It was in the middle of this numbing routine that she found a faded envelope tucked between two thick folders. Its edges were yellowed with age, the once crisp paper softened by time. Her heart thudded as she pulled it free, her gaze locking onto the bold letters scrawled across its surface. Confidential. Genetic testing results. The envelope's contents revealed a single damning sheet of paper. Gian's breath hitched as her eyes scanned the results. Her name wasn't on the document, but the genetic markers listed were unmistakable. Greg Grayson had a daughter, a biological daughter born decades ago. Gian read and reread the paper, her mind reeling with implications. She had suspected a connection to Greg ever since the unsettling sense of familiarity had taken root. Now, the DNA evidence confirmed what she feared most. The woman in the old photograph, the echoes of Greg's features in her own face, they weren't coincidences. Her hands shook as she traced the words. The implications swirled like a maelstrom in her mind. If this was true, why had she grown up as a stranger to the Graysons? And worse, why had Carly been so intent on ensuring she stayed in the shadows? A knock at the door jolted her out of her thoughts. Hastily shoving the papers into a drawer, Gian rose to find Benson standing there, his face etched with concern. "What is it?" he asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. His perceptive eyes scanned her pale face. "You've found something, haven't you?" "I have," Gian whispered, her voice hoarse with disbelief. "It's about me." Sitting across from Benson, Gian unfolded the events of her discovery, laying out the genetic test and the questions it raised. Benson's expression darkened as the pieces clicked into place. "I always suspected there was more to Carly's scheming," he said grimly. "But this changes everything. If you're Greg's daughter, then Carly must have known. She wouldn't have left something this significant to chance. Which means she likely had a hand in separating me from Greg," Gian said, her voice steadier now as her resolve crystallized. "It explains why she's always been so dismissive, so calculated. If Greg had known he had a daughter, she would have lost control," Benson finished. "Greg would have had an heir of his own blood, and Carly's influence would have crumbled." The two sat in silence, the gravity of the revelation hanging between them. Gian's mind raced as she recalled her childhood foster homes, blurred memories of distant faces, and the constant gnawing sense of not belonging. The answers she had sought her entire life now pointed back to the Grayson estate. "I need to confront Greg," Gian said finally, her voice hard with determination. "If there's any chance he can confirm this before it's too late, I have to try." But when Gian entered Greg's room that evening, his condition had worsened. His breathing was shallow, his skin waxen under the dim bedside lamp. She hesitated, her heart sinking at the sight of his frailty. "Mr. Grayson," she murmured, brushing a hand over his clammy forehead. His eyelids fluttered open briefly, his gaze glassy but faintly aware. "Gian?" he rasped, his voice barely audible. "There's something I need to ask you," she began, kneeling beside his bed. "It's important, do you remember?" But his eyes slipped shut before she could finish. She clenched her fists, swallowing her frustration. The truth would have to wait. Greg's inability to answer only fueled Jian's resolve. She spent the next several nights poring through the estate's archives, retracing Carly's steps in an effort to uncover how she had orchestrated the estrangement. Benson was an invaluable ally, guiding her to overlooked corners of the Grayson household. Together, they discovered more damning evidence. Old receipts from a private investigator hired by Carly, vague references in Greg's correspondence to missing time, and cryptic entries in Carly's personal ledger. Each clue painted a picture of deliberate manipulation steps Carly had taken to ensure Jian's existence remained hidden. In the attic, Jian uncovered another chilling artifact, a birth certificate marked with falsified information. The document listed a different set of parents, but the dates aligned perfectly with her suspected birth year. Jian stared at the forgery, her chest tightening. It was as if her very identity had been erased and rewritten to serve Carly's agenda. By the time Jian returned to her room, her notebook was overflowing with evidence. She leaned back in her chair, exhaustion tugging at her, but the weight of her findings kept her alert. Carly had gone to great lengths to keep her out of Greg's life, and now that she knew the truth, Jian was determined to make Carly pay for every lie. "Benson," she said the next morning, her voice steady despite her weariness, "it's time we take this to the next level. We need to find something so undeniable that even Carly can't spin her way out of it." The old butler nodded, his expression resolute. "Whatever it takes, Ms. Perez, we'll expose her." Jian's journey into the Grayson family's darkest secrets had taken a sharp personal turn. But as she prepared to delve deeper, she knew she couldn't stop now. Justice for Greg, for herself, and for the fractured family she had unwittingly entered was within reach. Rain lashed against the towering windows of the Grayson estate, its rhythmic drumming mirroring Jian's racing thoughts. In Greg's study, illuminated by the flickering light of a desk lamp, Jian and Benson sifted through piles of old documents, their movements methodical but urgent. The storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest raging within Jian. "Here!" Benson's gravelly voice cut through the silence as he pulled a worn folder from the bottom of a drawer. He spread its contents on the desk letters written in Greg's precise handwriting, police reports bearing the Grayson family crest, and a photograph of a newborn swaddled in a hospital blanket. Jian picked up one of the reports, her eyes scanning the page with a mix of dread and determination. It detailed the investigation into the kidnapping of Greg's daughter nearly 3 decades ago. "It says here, the baby was taken from the hospital nursery," she murmured, her voice trembling. "The case went cold after only a few months." Benson nodded solemnly. Greg was devastated. He poured every resource he had into finding her, but after years with no leads, he gave up at least publicly. I think he never truly stopped looking. Jian's chest tightened. She knew the truth now that child was her, but the weight of the revelation was almost too much to bear. "Carly must have orchestrated it," she said, the words bitter on her tongue. "She wanted me out of the picture before I could ever threaten her position." "And she succeeded," Benson added grimly. "But why? What was her endgame?" Jian didn't answer. Instead, she turned her attention to another stack of papers, a collection of financial transactions Benson had unearthed earlier. Her sharp eyes scanned the entries, searching for anything that might tie Carly to the kidnapping. "There," she pointed to a line item from 3 months after the kidnapping, a large payment to an untraceable adoption agency. "This could be it," Jian said, her voice firm despite the ache in her chest. Benson leaned closer, his brow furrowed. an agency that conveniently closed its doors not long after this transaction. The pieces began to click together in Jian's mind. She must have paid to place me into the foster care system. That way no one would connect me to Greg, and when the trail went cold, she could ensure no one would ever challenge her influence. As they worked, a new pattern emerged. Carly had left a trail of payments, forged documents, and cryptic notes, all designed to sever Greg from his daughter and maintain her iron grip on the Grayson Empire. The following night, Jian and Benson found themselves back in the attic, digging through a forgotten trunk Carly had hidden beneath layers of dust. Inside, they discovered an old journal belonging to Greg, its pages filled with anguish and longing. "He wrote about her," Jian whispered, running her fingers over the faded ink. "My daughter," she read aloud. "Wherever she is, I pray she's safe. Carly says I should move on, but I can't. I can't let her go." Benson's face darkened. He knew Carly wanted him to forget, but he never did. Jian turned the page, her breath catching at the sight of a folded letter tucked between the pages. It was from Carly, dated shortly after the kidnapping. Her tone was as cold and manipulative as Jian expected. "Greg, it's time to accept what's happened. Dwelling on this won't bring her back. Focus on what we still have on Adam. He needs you now more than ever." "Adam," Jian repeated, her mind racing. "He wasn't their biological son." Benson nodded grimly. "He was adopted not long after you were taken. Carly likely saw him as a replacement, a way to control Greg by giving him an heir without the emotional baggage of the past." Jian sank into a nearby chair, her head in her hands. The truth was more twisted than she could have imagined. She wasn't just a stranger to the Graysons, she was Greg's true heir, stolen and hidden away, while Adam had been brought in as a pawn in Carly's game. "I have to tell him," Jian said finally, her voice breaking. "Greg deserves to know the truth, before it's too late." Benson placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "And Adam?" Jian hesitated. "He's been as much a victim of Carly as I have. But how do I even begin to explain this to him?" "You'll find a way," Benson said, with quiet conviction. "But first, you need to focus on getting Greg well enough to hear it himself." Over the next few days, Jian and Benson worked tirelessly to gather the evidence they needed to confront Carly. They photographed documents, cataloged timelines, and even recorded Benson recounting his experiences in the Grayson household. Late one evening, as Jian reviewed their findings, a knock at the door interrupted her concentration. She opened it to find Carly standing there, her icy demeanor more pronounced than ever. "You've been busy," Carly said, her tone laced with suspicion. "Just doing my job," Jian replied evenly, meeting her gaze without flinching. "See that you don't overstep," Carly warned before disappearing into the shadowed hallway. Jian closed the door, her heart pounding. The battle lines were drawn, and she knew Carly wouldn't hesitate to strike. But armed with the truth and Benson's unwavering support, she was ready for the fight ahead. The morning sun broke through the dense gray clouds, its light refracted through the rain-speckled windows of the Grayson estate. The new day brought no relief from the tension hanging thick in the air. Jian Perez stood at the edge of Greg's study, her heart pounding as she stared at the scattered documents covering the mahogany desk. Each sheet of paper told a different fragment of the story she had uncovered, a story of deceit, manipulation, and stolen identities. But now, her focus turned to a single name: Adam Grayson. Adam wasn't Greg and Carly's biological son, the man who had once been her patient, her lover, and the subject of her deepest regrets, was an orphan adopted into a family ensnared by Carly's schemes. Jian clenched her fists, her mind reeling at the implications. "Miss Perez," Benson's gravelly voice interrupted her thoughts. He entered the room quietly, carrying a worn folder. "I've found more." Gian turned to him, her brows knitting together. "More about Adam?" Benson nodded, placing the folder on the desk and opening it to reveal a birth certificate. The name on it was unfamiliar, but the date and location matched Adam's adoption records perfectly. "She found him at an orphanage," Benson explained. "Faked a pregnancy for months to make it seem like Adam was her biological son. Greg never suspected a thing." Gian's breath caught in her throat. "Why go through all that trouble?" "To secure her hold over Greg," Benson replied. "He was devastated after losing his daughter. Carly needed an heir to keep him compliant, so she created one." Gian's fingers trembled as she traced the edges of the document. Her mind raced with memories of Adam, his bitter cynicism, his guarded heart, and the vulnerability he had shown only in fleeting moments. All of it made sense now. He too was a victim of Carly's machinations. "She didn't care about him," Gian said softly. "She just needed him to solidify her control." Benson nodded. And Greg? He saw Adam as a second chance. Even when Carly's affection toward the boy faded, Greg clung to the hope that he could salvage some semblance of family. Gian swallowed hard. "He deserves to know the truth, Benson. But how do I tell him without destroying him?" Benson placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes filled with quiet resolve. "Greg has lived his life, surrounded by lies. It's time he knows the truth, no matter how painful." As the day wore on, Gian contemplated how to reveal the truth to Adam. She had no illusions about how he would react. Their last encounter, marked by misunderstanding and pain, still weighed heavily on her heart. Yet she couldn't let that stop her. She decided to write him a letter carefully crafted, each word chosen with precision. She explained what she had discovered about his adoption and his place in the Grayson family. She included her findings about Carly's manipulations, framing the letter as a plea for him to return and hear the full truth from Greg himself. But the moment she sealed the envelope, a shadow passed over the room. The door creaked open, and Carly stepped inside, her icy gaze locking onto the letter in Gian's hand. "What are you doing?" Carly's voice was sharp, laced with suspicion. Gian's heart quickened, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I was writing to Adam. He deserves to know what's happening here." Carly's lips curled into a bitter smile. "You think you can manipulate him? Turn him against me?" "This isn't about you," Gian said firmly. "It's about Greg, about the lies you've built this family on." Carly stepped closer, her tone lowering to a dangerous whisper. "Adam won't believe you. He'll see you for what you are, a meddling outsider. Do yourself a favor and leave while you still can." Gian met Carly's gaze, her own unwavering. "I'm not going anywhere." That night, Gian enlisted Benson's help to plant a recording device in Carly's office. They needed more than circumstantial evidence to bring her down. They needed her own words condemning her. "Are you sure about this?" Benson asked as they carefully concealed the device beneath Carly's desk. "She's too careful," Gian replied, her voice a mixture of determination and exhaustion. "We need proof of her crimes, and this might be the only way to get it." The plan was simple. Bait Carly into discussing her schemes with Lawrence Davis, her co-conspirator. It was risky, but Gian knew they were running out of time. Greg's health was declining rapidly, and every day that passed brought Carly closer to solidifying her control. The following evening, Gian watched from a hidden corner as Carly entered her office. Lawrence arrived moments later, his polished demeanor masking the sinister partnership he shared with Carly. "You're sure she doesn't suspect anything?" Lawrence asked as they settled into the room. Carly laughed, the sound cold and devoid of humor. Gian? She's too preoccupied with Greg to pose a real threat. Let her play her little games. Lawrence leaned forward, his tone dark. And the girl? The one you dealt with years ago? Carly's expression turned to stone. She's gone. She was never a problem. Gian's breath caught as the recorder captured every word. As Carly and Lawrence continued their conversation, Gian felt a surge of hope. She finally had the evidence she needed to confront them, to expose the web of lies they had spun around the Grayson family. When the recording session ended, Gian retrieved the device with Benson's help, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "This is it," she said, her voice trembling with determination. "We're one step closer to bringing her down." Benson nodded, his expression grim but hopeful. "She won't see it coming." The Grayson estate seemed to hold its breath as the news of Adam's return spread. The household staff whispered in hushed tones, their voices barely audible over the constant rain pattering against the grand windows. Gian stood in the corner of the parlor, her eyes fixed on the storm outside. The world outside mirrored her inner turmoil, a roiling mix of anticipation, fear, and determination. Adam was coming back. After weeks of revelations and discoveries, Gian had barely processed the truth herself. Now, she would have to face the man she had once loved, armed with the knowledge of his fabricated identity and the deeper deceptions surrounding his place in the Grayson family. The sound of gravel crunching under tires pulled her attention to the driveway. Moments later, the sleek silhouette of a black car emerged from the mist, its headlights cutting through the gloom. Gian's breath caught as she saw him step out. Adam Grayson, his presence was as commanding as she remembered, his frame taller and broader, his expression guarded. The years abroad had tempered him, but the coldness in his gaze as he looked at the estate made it clear that his bitterness toward this place and everyone in it had only deepened. Carly was waiting at the front steps, her polished facade of maternal warmth firmly in place. She extended her arms in a show of affection, but Adam's response was perfunctory, a quick hug and averted eyes. His suitcase in hand, he scanned the estate's facade before his gaze fell on Gian. She didn't have time to steel herself for the moment their eyes met. A flicker of recognition passed over his face, followed quickly by a hard, distant look. Adam turned away, addressing Carly without acknowledging Gian's presence. "Let's get this over with," he said flatly. Gian waited until Adam was settled in his old quarters before attempting to approach him. She found him in the east wing, pacing the length of his childhood bedroom. The space was untouched ornate furniture, framed photographs, and books lining the shelves, as though time had frozen since he left. "Adam," she began softly, stepping into the room. He stopped mid-stride, turning to face her. His expression was unreadable, but the tension in his posture was unmistakable. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone sharp. "I work here now," Gian replied, keeping her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. "I'm Greg's nurse." Adam laughed bitterly. "Of course you do. Carly must love having you around." Another pawn in her perfect little chess game. "Adam, listen to me," she said, taking a step closer. "There's so much you don't know about your mother, about Greg, about us." "Don't," he interrupted, his voice cutting like a blade. "Don't pretend you care. You made your choice a long time ago." "I lied to protect you." Gian's voice cracked, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "Everything I did back then, it was because I didn't think I was good enough for you. And if you just let me explain." "I don't want your explanations," Adam snapped, his jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with anger. You think you can waltz back into my life after everything? After you tore it apart? The weight of his words hung in the air, silencing Jian. She watched as he turned away, his shoulders rigid. Whatever you're trying to do here, save it. I don't need your help. Adam's rejection stung, but Jian refused to give up. That evening, she sought out Benson, who was waiting in the study with the recording device and their meticulously gathered evidence. He won't listen to me, Jian admitted, slumping into the chair opposite Benson. But maybe if he hears it from you, he'll give us a chance to explain. Benson nodded, his expression grim. He's hurt, but he's not blind. Once he sees the truth for himself, he'll come around. Together, they devised a plan to get Adam alone with Benson. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Greg's condition worsened overnight, and Adam was summoned to his father's bedside by the household staff. He lingered outside the room, hesitating as the reality of Greg's frailty hit him. "That's not the man I remember," Adam muttered, his voice low. "It's the man you need to see," Benson said, stepping out of the shadows. Adam turned, his brows furrowing as he took in the sight of the old butler. "And it's the man who needs you now, more than ever." Adam's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" "Someone who served this family long before you knew it existed," Benson replied evenly. "And someone who knows the truths you've been denied." Curiosity and suspicion warred in Adam's expression, but he didn't leave. "What do you mean?" Benson motioned toward the study. "Come with me and I'll show you." Inside the study, Jian and Benson laid out their findings, the forged birth certificates, the payments to adoption agencies, the recordings of Carly's confessions. Adam stood silent, his face betraying nothing as he sifted through the mountain of evidence. But when he reached the letters, his hands began to shake. "This can't be real," he said hoarsely. "She wouldn't." "She did," Benson said, his voice firm. "And it's all here in black and white." Adam looked at Jian, his eyes filled with a mix of disbelief and pain. "You knew about this?" "I found out weeks ago," Jian admitted. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you." His shoulders slumped as the weight of the revelations bore down on him. "Everything I thought I knew, it's all a lie." "It doesn't have to stay that way," Jian said softly, stepping closer. "We can still make things right for Greg, for both of us." Adam's gaze lingered on her, the hardness in his eyes softening ever so slightly. "If what you're saying is true, then Carly has to pay." As the night wore on, Adam, Jian, and Benson worked together to piece together the final threads of their case against Carly. The tension between Adam and Jian remained palpable, but the shared goal of exposing the truth brought them to an uneasy truce. By the time dawn broke, Adam stood at the window, staring out at the sprawling estate. "You were right about one thing," he said quietly, addressing Jian. "I don't know anything about this family, but I'm ready to learn." Jian approached him, her heart pounding. "We'll face this together." Adam turned to her, his expression resolute. "Let's bring her down." The Grayson estate was unusually quiet, as if the air itself held its breath in anticipation. Adam sat in the study, surrounded by the gathered evidence of Carly's manipulations, his jaw tight and his eyes fixed on the damning documents spread before him. Across from him, Jian waited, her heart pounding in the silence. Benson lingered near the door, his presence both reassuring and solemn. The weight of the revelations hung heavily over them all. Adam's childhood, his identity, his trust in Carly, all shattered by the truths uncovered over the past weeks. And now, the time had come to confront it head-on. Benson stepped forward, his weathered hands clasped in front of him. "Adam," he began, his voice steady but grave. You need to hear everything. And you need to know why we've done this. Adam leaned back in his chair, his gaze flicking between the old butler and the woman he once loved. I've seen the documents, heard the recordings, but there's still one thing I don't understand why now. Why dig all this up? It's about Greg, Gian said softly, her voice trembling with urgency. His health is deteriorating because Carly and Lawrence are poisoning him. They've been manipulating his treatment, pushing him closer to death so they can secure control of the family fortune. Adam's expression darkened, his fists clenching. Poisoning him? Benson nodded. I've watched Carly for years. She's always been calculating, but this is darker than anything she's done before. And with the evidence Gian and I have gathered, we can prove it. Adam's hand hovered over a photograph of a younger Carly with Lawrence, the two of them smiling as if nothing in the world could touch them. She's been pulling the strings my entire life, he murmured, even before I came into the picture. Gian leaned forward, her voice firm despite the tremor in her chest. We can stop her, Adam, but we need your help to do it. The three of them worked tirelessly over the following days, compiling their findings into an airtight case. Gian and Benson reviewed Carly's financial transactions, highlighting the payments to the adoption agency and the falsified medical records. Adam focused on the recordings, his jaw tightening with each word Carly and Lawrence exchanged. This is enough to ruin her, Adam said, his voice laced with both anger and resolve. But it won't bring back the years she's taken from us. It might not, Benson replied, his tone measured. But it will protect Greg and ensure she can't hurt anyone else. Their alliance, though fragile, grew stronger with each revelation. Adam's initial resentment toward Gian softened as he saw the lengths she had gone to uncover the truth. Gian, in turn, marveled at Adam's resilience, despite the betrayal he had endured. One evening, Gian brought Adam into Greg's room. The sight of his father, frail and unconscious, struck Adam harder than he had expected. He stood at the bedside, his hand hovering over Greg's but never quite touching. He deserved better than this, Adam said quietly. He deserved someone who truly cared for him. Not her. He still has time, Gian said gently. If we can expose Carly and get him proper treatment, he could recover. But we have to act fast. Adam nodded, his gaze hardening. Then let's end this. The confrontation was planned for the following evening, during one of Carly's infamous dinner gatherings. The household staff was instructed to remain discreet, and Benson ensured that every piece of evidence was ready to present. As the guests settled into the opulent dining room, Carly presided over the table with her usual charm, her laughter echoing through the space. Adam and Gian exchanged a glance from their seats at opposite ends of the room, their resolve unspoken but clear. Midway through the meal, Adam rose to his feet, his glass raised as if to make a toast. I'd like to thank everyone for being here tonight, he began, his voice steady and commanding. And I'd especially like to thank my mother for everything she's done to shape this family. Carly's smile widened, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. Adam, darling, you're too kind. I'm not sure you'll think so when I'm finished, Adam said, his tone hardening. He set the glass down and motioned to Benson, who entered the room carrying a stack of documents. The guests murmured in confusion as Adam began to speak, outlining Carly's lies, manipulations, and crimes. He presented the financial records, the falsified adoption papers, and the recordings of her conversations with Lawrence. This, Adam said, holding up a photograph of Greg with his newborn daughter, is my sister. The daughter my mother ensured was stolen from this family. And this, he added, turning to Carly, is the woman who orchestrated it all. Carly's mask of composure slipped, her face paling as the weight of Adam's accusations sank in. "This is absurd!" she exclaimed, rising to her feet. "You have no proof how?" "We have everything," Gian interrupted, her voice ringing with clarity. She stood beside Adam, her presence both steady and defiant. "Every lie, every betrayal, it's all here." The room fell silent as the guests absorbed the gravity of the evidence. Carly's protests grew more desperate, but the tide had turned. The authorities arrived within the hour, summoned by Adam and Benson. Carly and Lawrence were led away in handcuffs, their protests drowned out by the murmurs of the household staff and the stunned silence of the guests. Adam watched them go, his expression unreadable. Gian stepped beside him, her hand brushing his lightly. "It's over," she said softly. "For them," Adam replied. He turned to her, his gaze searching. "But for us, it's just beginning." The air in the courtroom was heavy with anticipation, the low hum of whispers rising and falling as the proceedings began. Adam Grayson sat near the front, his jaw clenched as the weight of the past weeks bore down on him. Gian Perez was seated beside him, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm. Across the room, Carly Grayson and Lawrence Davis sat at the defendant's table, their expressions a stark contrast. Carly's features were drawn tight with indignation, while Lawrence maintained an icy calm. The evidence Gian and Benson had painstakingly gathered had painted a picture so damning that even Carly's charm couldn't deflect it. Now justice was no longer a distant hope, it was within reach. The prosecutor's opening statement was a scalpel, cutting through Carly and Lawrence's carefully constructed facades. "This case," she began, her voice crisp and commanding, "is not just about fraud or embezzlement. It is about the calculated destruction of lives, the betrayal of trust, and the deliberate poisoning of a man who should have been cherished by those closest to him." Adam's fists tightened at the mention of Greg, but he kept his composure. Gian, sensing his tension, placed a gentle hand on his arm, a small but grounding gesture. The prosecution laid out the timeline of events, detailing Carly's schemes to control the Grayson fortune. The forged documents, the financial transactions to the adoption agency, and the recordings of her conversations with Lawrence were presented with meticulous precision. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of Carly's defense. When the prosecutor played the recording of Carly discussing Greg's treatment, the courtroom fell silent. Carly's voice filled the room, cold and unrepentant. "Greg won't last another month if we keep the dosage steady. Once he's gone, we can finalize the estate." Adam's vision blurred with rage. He forced himself to breathe, to focus on the outcome rather than the fury clawing at his chest. The defense tried to spin the narrative, painting Carly as a devoted wife who had been misunderstood and manipulated by Lawrence, but the weight of the evidence was insurmountable. Lawrence's attempts to shift blame onto Carly only solidified their guilt in the eyes of the jury. The verdict was swift, guilty on all counts. Carly and Lawrence were sentenced to decades in prison for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. As the judge's gavel fell, a wave of relief washed over Adam and Gian. Justice had been served, but the scars left behind by Carly's betrayal would take far longer to heal. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, their cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward. "Mr. Grayson," they called. "Do you have a statement about the trial's outcome?" Adam paused, his shoulders squared and his voice steady. "Justice has been served today, but this is only the beginning. My family will rebuild, and we will honor my father's legacy with integrity." The headlines the next day were brutal. Socialite Carly Grayson exposed as mastermind behind estate scandal. Her once gilded reputation was in tatters, her name synonymous with greed and betrayal. Meanwhile, Adam worked tirelessly to restore his father's reputation and the Grayson family's standing in the business world. He distanced himself from Carly's shadow, focusing on rebuilding the family's charitable foundation with Gian's help. In the weeks that followed, the Grayson estate began to heal. Greg's health improved under Gian's care, the poison slowly leaving his system. Though still frail, he showed signs of the man he had once been a father, longing to reconnect with his children. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the estate in hues of gold and amber, Adam and Gian sat on the terrace. The quiet was a balm after the chaos of the past months. "Do you think it's really over?" Adam asked, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Gian nodded. "For them, yes. But for us, it's a new beginning." Adam turned to her, his expression softening. "I couldn't have done this without you." "And I wouldn't have found my place without you," Gian replied, her voice steady. "We've been through so much, Adam. But maybe now, we can finally start healing." As the first stars appeared in the night sky, a sense of peace settled over them. The Grayson family's darkest secrets had been brought to light, and though the road ahead was uncertain, they faced it together. The soft hum of machinery filled the quiet corners of Greg Grayson's hospital room. Monitors blinked steadily, each pulse an affirmation that time, though fleeting, had not yet abandoned him. Gian Perez sat by the bedside, her eyes scanning the medical chart in her lap for the 100th time. The room carried a sterile calm, interrupted only by the distant murmur of voices in the hallway. She had read about the experimental treatment weeks earlier, a clinical trial promising breakthrough results for advanced neurological conditions. It was a gamble, but with Greg's health deteriorating rapidly, gambling was all they had left. The door opened, and Dr. Carlyle entered with the weight of authority. His sharp eyes scanned the monitors before addressing Gian. "You're sure about this?" he asked, his voice low. "The treatment is still in experimental phases. The risks are worth it," Gian interrupted, her voice firm. "We've documented every irregularity in his previous medications. Carly's manipulation set him on this path, but this treatment could be his only chance." Dr. Carlyle nodded slowly. "Very well. We'll begin the first dose this evening." Gian leaned forward, brushing a strand of hair from Greg's forehead. "We're going to fix this," she whispered, as much to herself as to the unconscious man before her. "I promise." Hours later, the medical team administered the first dose of the experimental drug. Gian watched from the corner of the room, her heart a storm of hope and dread. The room seemed to hold its breath as the monitors beeped steadily. No immediate changes, but the doctors assured her that patience was key. Over the following days, subtle improvements began to emerge. Greg's breathing stabilized, his color returned, and the faintest flicker of awareness danced in his eyes during moments of lucidity. The breakthrough came on a quiet morning. Gian had barely sat down with her coffee when Greg's voice, a hoarse but unmistakable whisper, broke the silence. "Gian?" Her cup clattered to the floor as she rushed to his side. "Mr. Grayson," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "You're awake." Greg's eyes, though weak, held clarity she hadn't seen in months. "You've been here," he rasped. "All this time." "Yes," Gian choked out, her voice trembling. "And I'm not going anywhere." He reached for her hand, his grip frail but purposeful. "You saved me," he murmured. "And there's so much I need to say." The following days brought a cascade of revelations. Greg, now strong enough to speak in longer intervals, confirmed the suspicions Gian had pieced together. He acknowledged the daughter he had thought lost, the lies Carly had woven, and the profound gratitude he felt for Gian's perseverance. "I always wondered," Greg said one evening, his voice stronger now, "if my daughter would ever find her way back to me. I just never thought it would be like this." Gian smiled through her tears, her heart swelling with a mix of sorrow and joy. "I'm here now," she said, "and I'm not going anywhere." As Greg's strength grew, so did his involvement in the dismantling of Carly's influence. He reviewed the evidence Gian and Adam had gathered, his resolve hardening with each revelation. "She took everything," he said one evening, his voice laced with quiet fury. "But she won't take any more." With Greg's blessing, Gian began to transition from caregiver to trusted confidant. She found herself assisting in meetings with lawyers, reviewing the estate's tangled finances, and slowly stepping into the role Greg had once envisioned for his daughter. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the estate's sprawling gardens, Greg called Gian to the veranda. He sat in a wheelchair, a blanket draped over his lap, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "You know," he began, his voice thoughtful, "I used to dream about moments like this, sitting here with my family, watching the sunset." Gian took the seat beside him, her heart heavy with unspoken words. "You still have your family," she said softly. "Adam's here, and so am I." Greg reached for her hand, his expression both tender and remorseful. "I'm sorry for all the years we lost, for not finding you sooner. You deserve so much more." "You couldn't have known," Gian replied, her voice steady. "But we have now, and that's enough." With Greg's recovery progressing steadily, the focus shifted toward rebuilding what Carly had nearly destroyed. Greg formalized Gian's position in the family, ensuring her place in the company's leadership. Adam, too, began to take a more active role, though his relationship with Greg remained strained. "I'm not sure I can ever forgive him," Adam admitted to Gian one evening, his voice heavy with unresolved pain. "But I'll try. For you." Gian placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch a quiet reassurance. "That's all anyone can ask." Together, the three of them began to envision a future no longer marred by Carly's shadow, a future built on truth, resilience, and hope. The chapter closed with a quiet moment in the garden. Greg, Gian, and Adam sat together beneath the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree. Laughter, tentative but genuine, broke the stillness of the evening. As the first stars began to dot the night sky, Greg spoke, his voice filled with quiet determination. "We've been through hell," he said, "but we're still here, and that's worth everything." Jan smiled, her heart light for the first time in months. "Here's to a new beginning." The sunlight filtering through the wide bay windows of the Grayson estate was warm and golden, the kind of light that promised renewal. It touched everything in the room with a soft glow, the freshly polished mahogany furniture, the neatly stacked ledgers on Greg's desk, and the framed photograph of a young Adam and Greg, their expressions frozen in a moment of untainted joy. For the first time in months, the Grayson household felt alive again. Gian Perez stood at the threshold of Greg's study, her posture relaxed yet poised, an echo of the confidence she had gained through months of relentless pursuit of the truth. Her eyes swept over the room, finally settling on Greg Grayson, seated comfortably in a high-backed chair by the window. His face, though still pale, had regained some color, and his sharp eyes held a spark that had been absent for far too long. "You've been quiet," Gian said softly, stepping into the room. Greg looked up, a faint smile playing on his lips. Quiet, yes, but not idle. He gestured to the stack of papers on the desk. I've been drafting a new will, one that reflects the truth. The truth had changed everything, but it had not broken the bonds between the family members. Instead, it had provided a chance to rebuild. Over the weeks that followed Carly and Lawrence's dramatic downfall, Adam had taken tentative steps toward reconciling with Greg. It hadn't been easy. The scars left by years of manipulation and betrayal didn't heal overnight, but the effort was evident in the way father and son now shared quiet moments together. Gian had played her part too. She had been the bridge between them, her calm presence, a reminder of the resilience that had carried them through their darkest days. I spoke with Adam this morning, Greg said, breaking the silence. He's agreed to oversee the foundation. Said it's time to put his energy into something meaningful. That's good, Gian replied, her voice steady. He's finding his place. Greg's gaze softened as it rested on her. And what about you, Gian? Have you found yours? She hesitated, the weight of his question settling over her. I think so, she said finally. Here, with you and Adam. It feels right. Later that afternoon, the family gathered in the expansive dining room. The table was set with simplicity, a marked departure from the opulent displays Carly had once favored. Adam arrived first, his demeanor relaxed but thoughtful, a notebook tucked under his arm. I've been thinking about the foundation's direction, he said as he took his seat. We could focus on healthcare access. It's what this family's legacy should have been about all along. Greg nodded, pride evident in his expression. Your mother may have lost sight of that, but you won't. I know you'll do what's right. Gian entered moments later, carrying a tray of tea. And what about the pharmaceutical company? She asked, her tone curious. Have you decided who will lead it? Greg exchanged a glance with Adam before turning to Gian. You, he said simply. You've shown more integrity and care than anyone I've known. The company needs that now. Gian blinked, momentarily stunned. Greg, I don't know what to say. Say you'll do it, Adam interjected, a small smile tugging at his lips. It's the logical choice. Her gaze shifted between them, and after a moment she nodded. All right, I'll do it. The day ended at the beach, a spur-of-the-moment decision suggested by Adam. The three of them, Greg, Adam, and Gian, walked along the shoreline, the rhythmic crash of the waves providing a soothing backdrop. Greg leaned on a cane, his steps measured but purposeful, while Adam carried a kite, its tail streaming brightly in the breeze. Do you remember the last time we were here? Greg asked Adam, his voice tinged with nostalgia. Adam chuckled. I do. I got sunburned so badly you had to carry me to the car. Gian laughed, the sound light and unguarded. And yet here we are again. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the three of them stood together, their silhouettes outlined by the fading light. It was a moment of quiet reflection, a symbol of everything they had endured and everything they had become. For the first time in years, the Grayson family felt whole. Not perfect, not unscarred, but united. They had faced the truth, weathered the storm, and emerged stronger. And as they watched the waves lap at the shore, there was a shared understanding that the future, while uncertain, was theirs to shape.